we're back, and today is part 2 for a little mini-series on processing geese. Last video we looked at collecting the down, which kind of came before what I think most people would think is the main event, processing the meat. So this is going to be a little bit cumbersome with the gloves on, but I'm going to give it a shot here.
We'll get it to just the right setting.
And it's pretty simple. You're just kind of going over the body and singeing off what's left.
Yeah, burning off that little bit extra down that I could not get off there. And trust me, the smell is not very pretty.
You gotta get used to it though. We used to use candles for this. The torch is easier. You're really just getting this so that when you cook it, you don't get an oven full of smoky feathers. This is definitely a part you would do outdoors. So we're basically done, and you can see it's made for, cleaned it up is basically what it's done. It's not perfect, but it doesn't have to be because it's still going to taste amazing. It's getting quite cold out here. We're going to take this inside to do the next piece because it's pretty cold. So it's cooling down really quickly on us considering yesterday it was pouring rain. So.
Yes, this is ridiculous weather, just to add to things. But we're going to finish this up inside.
So we're now inside. We're in the basement, which is a lot nicer than it is outside, but still pretty cool. And we're going to get ready here to, I guess, start this process on these whole birds, these 2 whole birds, of getting them prepped for the freezer or the oven, whichever. We think we're probably going to cook one of them this weekend because we're actually running low on the oil, which is, stay tuned for the next video on that. But the other one we're definitely going to freeze. So we're going to show you kind of the steps involved. So here's goose number 1. This was the first one that we plucked. This one actually plucked a lot better than the second one. I noticed when we got it to this point, this bird was actually in a bit better condition. The bigger of the 2 birds, well, we had noticed that he'd been doing a lot of fighting and trying to assert himself as a male for the ladies, and I think that's why he wasn't in as good a shape. But this one, you can kind of see it when I touch it. See how it leaves the little, that's all fat under there. So this bird is going to stay as a whole bird, hence why we plucked it to this point. And the first thing we're going to do is basically disjoint the legs, and this is the same for almost any kind of poultry, ducks, geese, chickens, it's all the same. Then we're going to remove the wings, or I'm going to show you how we usually do, and kind of why we do it, where we do it. And then we'll remove the head and do the cleaning. And then basically at that point, from here, it goes relatively quickly. So we're working on top of the freezer down in the basement. It's a perfect height for this, and we can wash it off afterwards. Not that this is too bad, but so the first thing is the leg. We just, and like I say, this is the same for all birds. I just kind of make a cut, and it's not too whatever, and then pardon the noise, but break it back, and then I use my handy dandy cutters. These are quite invaluable. It cuts through the tendons, and that's one leg off. And then basically you're just repeating on the other leg. So the next part is the wing. Now there are different ways to do this. Properly, I guess, grocery store type bird will be basically plucked all the way up and out to the fingers. But we tend to find there is some meat in there, but there's not a lot, relatively speaking, but there is quite a bit of meat down in here. As what I usually do is kind of disjoint it at the elbow. So we've kind of cleaned it up. I just basically make a incision back to the piece here, It's a little hard to see, our lighting is not perfect, but that's what we've got to work with. It's pretty much the same as the taking the tendon. Geese being bigger birds, it's like turkeys, the tendons can be pretty tough. And basically, there's the wing off. So there isn't too much meat at the end of it. It's more up in here in the shoulder. So that'll stay quite protected when you cook it. So you can see here when we were plucking where we damaged the skin a little bit, that won't cause a major problem. The next part is to kind of remove the neck. And so what I usually do is I cut around the skin, and then I'll flip this over. Do apologize, the lighting is not amazingly fantastic down here. You're not really going super deep. This is just kind of cutting the skin to leave yourself a little bit of a flap. And then you can see when I open this up, there's a lot of fat in there. So the next part I do is kind of again take my cutters and find a decent spot on the neck and free that up. I try to do it back a little bit so that it's covered by the skin a bit, so that it stays moisture when you're cooking it, essentially. On chickens, I sometimes open it up a bit further back. And then basically I'll take this out and we'll open it up. So here you can see what I mean by having a little bit of a flap of skin there. We just find this is nice to have because it protects the actual flesh that's up in here from drying out when you're cooking it. So the next part is opening up the cavity. You can see here they're kind of sticking out, just the way geese are built, is basically part of the hip that sticks out. You're kind of, well, this part down here is of course the cloaca, as they're called, and you're basically cutting, like the tail is here, cutting this so that this part that my finger's around kind of comes out with everything else. And on the geese, you will have to open it up. You don't always have to open the skin right up to the bottom of the keel or the breastbone. It's not as big of a space to work with on the chickens, so usually you end up doing that. With the geese, you can sometimes keep a bit of the I guess the skin here intact. Now, before I open it up too, this is where I can kind of feel it in there. This is where there's quite a bit of fat on a whole bird. So this area, when we get it opened up, we'll take this fat out and put it aside. But that's another video. So this right here is the oil gland. And when you do singe it, it's full of oil and on a duck and a goose, and it does kind of light up like a little candle. But you can remove this. So all you're really doing is kind of cutting it out. It's not completely necessary, but it doesn't hurt, and then that's gone. So this is the tail, and I usually make an incision kind of below the tail to free things up. And then this bird's a little oddly shaped, but I will usually, and I'm not very deep here, come up in like a triangle. And pardon my hands, it's hard to keep everything out of the way. This is going a little slower too because I'm kind of doing it backwards, but I kind of make sure I get a little triangle freed up. Of course I've got cats trying to help me. But you can see, I don't want to free that up too much, but you can see the goose lard in here. So the next part, I probably will come up here just for simplicity's sake. I kind of just want to go under the skin, and I am using a fillet knife for this. I find that works really well for birds, and that'll open it up a bit.
Wow, you're not kidding about the lard.
No, there is a lot on a goose, and this is all very, very usable. At this point, we've removed the lard from the lower abdomen, which basically opens up the cavity. Geese are quite large, like turkeys, so you can easily get your hand into them. It's not like some small chickens and small ducks where it's a bit of a challenge. So it's fairly easy to get the organs out. Several of the organs are worth keeping, whether you eat them yourself, which is completely, you can totally do that, or whether you put them aside for pet food. The choice is kind of up to you. We generally choose the latter and use it for pet food. You essentially have the gizzard, which is part of the stomach. There is the livers can be kept aside. The heart is another one that can be kept. And if you can find the kidneys, those are also completely fine to keep. A lot of the rest of it really is what do they call it, the offal, the discarded bit. And for us, what we do is we basically collect that and compost it in a hot compost. It breaks down to nothing. So we're going to go ahead and get this bird cleaned out, and then we'll come back and sort of show you what we've got out of it. So here's the organs that we've got. We've got the liver, the heart, which in a goose is pretty big, and the gizzard, which is, like I say, the part of the stomach that really does all the work for a bird. This, which actually ends up being a fair bit of weight, especially the gizzard, which is completely muscle. Like I say, this is going to cat food, but it's still a usable product coming out of the goose. Well, we are completely finished processing. So we have the 3 birds that we did. Now I think we focused mostly on this one in this video, and also in our video on collecting the down from it. So this bird here, which essentially after processing it we would have said is one of the better of the 3 birds, this male, he was 7 3/4 pounds by the time you get to this. So that's pretty good. The second male, which I think was the biggest of the bunch, sort of live weight, actually was basically the same. It was 7 3/4 pounds as well. So even though that bird was heavier live, what you kind of ended up usable as a final carcass wasn't as big. And then the hen, she was basically 6 pounds by the time we get processed to here. So all in all, that's a lot of meat. And our plan is for these 2, we're going to freeze them essentially for later. And this one we're going to cook now. And the reason for this is, as you'll see in our next video, we are going to collect oil. So we're going to space out the cooking of our geese so that rather than collect it all at once, we can collect it as we go.